HMS Hood, Pennant No. 51, was the last battlecruiser built for the Royal Navy. Commissioned in 1920, she was named after the 18th-century Admiral Samuel Hood, one of 4 Admiral-class battlecruisers ordered in mid-1916. Hood had design limitations, though her design was revised after the Battle of Jutland and improved while she was under construction. For this reason she was the only ship of her class to be completed. Despite the appearance of new and more modern ship designs over time, Hood remained the largest and most powerful warship in the world for 20 years after her commissioning, and her prestige was reflected in her nickname of the Mighty Hood. Hood was involved in several showing the flag exercises between her commissioning in 1920 and the outbreak of war in 1939, including training exercises in the Mediterranean Sea and a circumnavigation of the globe with the Special Service Squadron in 1923 and 1924. She was attached to the Mediterranean Fleet following the outbreak of the Second Italo-Abyssinian War. When the Spanish Civil War broke out, Hood was officially assigned to the Mediterranean Fleet until she had to return to Britain in 1939 for an overhaul. By this time, advances in naval gunnery had reduced Hood's usefulness. She was scheduled to undergo a major rebuild in 1941 to correct these issues. But the outbreak of World War II in September 1939 forced the ship into service without the upgrades. When war with Germany was declared, Hood was operating in the area around Iceland, and she spent the next several months hunting between Iceland and the Norwegian Sea for German commerce raiders and blockade runners. After a brief overhaul of her propulsion system, she sailed as the flagship of Force H, and participated in the destruction of the French fleet at Mers el-Kabir. Relieved as flagship of Force H, Hood was dispatched to Scapa Flow, and operated in the area as a convoy escort and later as a defense against a potential German invasion fleet. In May 1941, she and the battleship Prince of Wales were ordered to intercept the German battleship Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, which were en route to the Atlantic where they were to attack convoys. On 24 May 1941, early in the Battle of the Denmark Strait, Hood was struck by several German shells, exploded and sank. Due to her perceived invincibility, the loss affected British morale. The Royal Navy conducted 2 inquiries into the reasons for the ship's quick demise. The first, held soon after the ship's loss, concluded that Hood's aft magazine had exploded after one of Bismarck's shells penetrated the ship's armor. A second inquiry was held after complaints that the first board had failed to consider alternative explanations, such as an explosion of the ship's torpedoes. It was more thorough than the first board and concurred with the first board's conclusion. Despite the official explanation, some historians continued to believe that the torpedoes caused the ship's loss, while others proposed an accidental explosion inside one of the ship's gun turrets that reached down into the magazine. Other historians have concentrated on the cause of the magazine explosion. The discovery of the ship's wreck in 2001 confirmed the conclusion of both boards, although the exact reason the magazines detonated is likely to remain unknown since that area of the ship was destroyed in the explosion. Design and description. The Admiral-class battlecruisers were designed in response to the German Mackensen-class battlecruisers, which were reported to be more heavily armed and armoured than the latest British battlecruisers of the Renown and the Courageous classes. The design was revised after the Battle of Jutland to incorporate heavier armour, and all 4 ships were laid down. Only Hood was completed, because the ships were very expensive and required labour and material that could be put to better used building merchant ships needed to replace those lost to the German U-boat campaign. Hood was significantly larger than her predecessors of the Renown class. As completed, she had an overall length of 860 feet 7 inches, 262.3 meters, a maximum beam of 104 feet 2 inches, 31.8 meters, and a draft of 32 feet, 9.8 meters. At deep load, this was 110 feet, 33.5 meters, longer and 14 feet, 4.3 meters, wider than the older ships. She displaced 42,670 long tons, 43,350 t at load, and 46,680 long tons, 47,430 t at deep load. Over 13,000 long tons, 13,210 t, more than the older ships. The ship had a complete double bottom. Hood had a metacentric height of 4.2 feet, 1.3 meters, at deep load, which minimized her roll and made her a steady gun platform. The additional armor added during construction increased her draft by about 4 feet, 1.2 meters, at deep load, which reduced her freeboard and made her very wet. At full speed, or in heavy seas, water would flow over the ship's quarterdeck and often entered the mess decks and living quarters through ventilation shafts. This characteristic earned her the nickname of the largest submarine in the Navy. The persistent dampness, coupled with the ship's poor ventilation, was blamed for the high incidence of tuberculosis aboard. The ship's complement varied widely over her career. In 1919, she was authorized 1433 men as a squadron flagship. In 1934, she had 81 officers and 1244 men aboard. The propulsion system consisted of 24 Yarrow boilers, connected to Brown Curtis geared steam turbines driving 4 propellers. The battlecruisers' turbines were designed to produce 144,000 shaft horsepower, 107,000 kilowatts, which would propel the ship at 31 knots, 57 kilometers per hour, 36 miles per hour. But during sea trials in 1920, Hood's turbines provided 151,280 shp, 112,810 kilowatts, which allowed her to reach 32.07 knots, 59.39 kilometers per hour, 36.91 miles per hour. She carried approximately 3,895 long tons, 3,958 t of fuel oil, which gave an estimated range of 7,500 nautical miles, 13,900 kilometers, 8,600 miles, at 14 knots, 26 kilometers per hour, 16 miles per hour. Armament. Hood carried 8 .42 caliber BL 15-inch MKI guns in hydraulically powered twin-gun turrets. The guns could depress to -5 degrees and elevate to +30 degrees. At maximum elevation, they fired a 1920-pound, 870 kilograms shell to a maximum range of 30,180 yards, 27,600 meters. The turrets were designated A, B, X, and Y from front to rear. 120 shells were carried for each gun. Hood's secondary armament was a dozen 50 caliber BL 5.5-inch MKI guns, each with 200 rounds. They were shipped on shielded single pivot mounts fitted along the upper deck and the forward shelter deck. This high position allowed them to be worked during heavy weather as they were less affected by waves and spray compared with the casemate mounts of earlier British capital ships. Two of these guns on the shelter deck were temporarily replaced by QF 4-inch MKV anti-aircraft AA guns between 1938 and 1939. All the 5.5-inch guns were removed during another refit in 1940. The gun fired a 82-pound, 37 kilograms shell to a maximum range of 17,770 yards, 16,250 meters. The original anti-aircraft armament consisted of 4 QF 4-inch MKV guns on single mounts. These were joined in early 1939 by 4 twin mounts for the 45 caliber QF 4-inch Mark 16 dual-purpose gun. The single guns were removed in mid-1939 and a further 3 twin Mark 19 mounts were added in early 1940. This mounting could elevate from -10 to +80 degrees. The Mk16 gun fired about 12 35-pound, 16 kilograms, high explosive shells per minute at a muzzle velocity of 2,660 feet per second. 810 meters per second. Against surface targets, it had a range of 19,850 yards, 18,150 meters, and a maximum ceiling of 39,000 feet, 12,000 meters, but an effective anti-aircraft range of much less. In 1931, a pair of octuple mountings for the 40mm, 1.6-in QF 2-pounder Mk8 gun were added on the shelter deck, abreast the funnels, and a third mount was added in 1937. These gun mounts could depress to -10 degrees and elevate to a maximum of +80 degrees. The Mk8 2-pounder gun fired a 40mm, 1.6-in, 0.91 pound, 0.41 kilograms shell at a muzzle velocity of 1,920 feet per second, 590 meters per second, to a distance of 3,800 yards, 3,500 meters. The gun's rate of fire was approximately 96 to 98 rounds per minute. 2 quadruple mountings for the 0.5-inch Vickers Mk3 machine gun were added in 1933 with 2 more mountings added in 1937. These mounts could depress to -10 degrees and elevate to a maximum of +70 degrees. The machine guns fired a 1.326-ounce, 37.6 grams bullet at a muzzle velocity of 2,520 feet per second, 770 meters per second. This gave the gun a maximum range of about 5,000 yards, 4,600 meters, although its effective range was only 800 yards, 730 meters. To these were added 5 unrotated projectile up launchers in 1940, each launcher carrying 27-inch, 180mm rockets. When they detonated, the rockets shot out lengths of cable that were kept aloft by parachutes. The cable was intended to snag aircraft and draw up the small aerial mine which would destroy the aircraft. 6 fixed 21-inch, 530mm torpedo tubes were mounted on hood, 3 on each broadside. 2 of these were submerged forward of a turret's magazine and the other 4 were above water, above the rear funnel. The MKIV torpedoes had a warhead of 515 pounds, 234 kilograms of TNT. They had 2 speed and range settings: 25 knots, 46 kilometers per hour, 29 miles per hour, with a maximum range of 13,500 yards, 12,300 meters, or 40 knots, 74 kilometers per hour, 46 miles per hour, to 5,000 yards, 4,600 meters. Approximately 28 torpedoes were carried. Fire control. Hood was completed with 2 fire control directors. One was mounted above the conning tower, protected by an armored hood, and was fitted with a 30-foot, 9.1-meter rangefinder. The other was fitted in the spotting top above the tripod foremast and equipped with a 15-foot, 4.6 meters rangefinder. Each turret was also fitted with a 30-foot, 9.1-meter rangefinder. The secondary armament was primarily controlled by directors mounted on each side of the bridge. They were supplemented by 2 additional control positions in the foretop, which were provided with 9-foot, 2.7 meters rangefinders, fitted in 1924-25. The anti-aircraft guns were controlled by a simple, high-angle 2-meter, 6 feet 7 in rangefinder mounted on the aft control position, fitted in 1926-27. 3 torpedo control towers were fitted, each with a 15-foot, 4.6 meters rangefinder. One was on each side of the amidships control tower and the third was on the center line abaft the aft control position. During the 1929-31 refit, a high-angle control system, HACS, Mark I director was added on the rear searchlight platform and 2 positions for 2-pounder pom-pom anti-aircraft directors were added at the rear of the spotting top. Although only 1 director was initially fitted, the 5.5-inch control positions and the rangefinders on the spotting top were removed during the 1932 refit. In 1934, the pom-pom directors were moved to the former locations of the 5.5-inch control positions on the spotting top and the 9-foot, 2.7 meters rangefinders for the 5.5-inch control positions were reinstalled on the signal platform. 2 years later, the pom-pom directors were moved to the rear corners of the bridge to get them out of the funnel gases. Another pom-pom director was added on the rear superstructure abaft the HACS director in 1938. 2 HACS Mark III directors were added to the aft end of the signal platform the following year, and the Mark I director aft was replaced by a Mark III. During Hood's last refit in 1941, a Type 279 air warning radar and a Type 284 gunnery radar were installed. Although the Type 279 radar lacked its receiving aerial and was inoperable, protection. Hood's armor scheme was originally based on that of the battlecruiser Tiger with an 8-inch, 203 mm waterline belt. Unlike on Tiger, the armor was angled outwards 12 degrees from the waterline to increase its relative thickness in relation to flat trajectory shells. This change increased the ship's vulnerability to plunging high trajectory shells as it exposed more of the vulnerable deck armor. 5,000 long tons, 5,100 t of armor was added to the design in late 1916, based on British experiences at the Battle of Jutland, at the cost of deeper draft and slightly decreased speed. To save construction time, this was accomplished by thickening the existing armor, rather than redesigning the entire ship. Hood's protection accounted for 33% of her displacement, a high proportion by British standards, but less than was usual in contemporary German designs. For example, 36% for the battlecruiser HMS Hindenburg. The armored belt consisted of face-hardened crop-cemented armor, KC, arranged in 3 strakes. The main waterline belt was 12 inches, 305 mm, thick between A and Y barbets and thin to 5 to 6 inches, 127 to 152 mm, towards the ship's ends, but did not reach either the bow or the stern. The middle armor belt had a maximum thickness of 7 inches, 178 millimeters, over the same length as the thickest part of the waterline armor and thin to 5 inches abreast, a barbette. The upper belt was 5 inches thick amidships and extended forward to a barbette, with a short 4-inch, 102 millimeters, extension aft. The gun turrets and barbettes were protected by 11 to 15 inches, 279 to 381 millimeters, of KC armor, except for the turret roofs which were 5 inches thick. The decks were made of high-tensile steel. The forecastle deck ranged from 1.75 to 2 inches, 44 to 51 millimeters, in thickness, while the upper deck was 2 inches, 51 millimeters, thick over the magazines and 0.75 inches, 19 millimeters, elsewhere. The main deck was 3 inches, 76 millimeters, thick over the magazines and 1 inch, 25 millimeters, elsewhere, except for the 2-inch thick slope that met the bottom of the main belt. The lower deck was 3 inches thick over the propeller shafts, 2 inches thick over the magazines and 1 inch elsewhere. The 3-inch plating on the main deck was added at a very late stage of construction, and the fore, aftermost 5.5-inch guns and their ammunition hoists were removed in partial compensation. Live firing trials with a new 15-inch APC armor-piercing, capped shell against a mock-up of Hood showed that this shell could penetrate the ship's vitals via the 7-inch middle belt and the 2-inch slope of the main deck. A proposal was made to increase the armor over the forward magazines to 5 inches and 6 inches over the rear magazines in July 1919 in response to these trials. To compensate for the additional weight, the 2 submerged torpedo tubes and the armor for the rear torpedo warheads were removed, and the armor for the aft torpedo control tower was reduced in thickness from 6 to 1.5 inches, 38 millimeters. However, the additional armor was never fitted pending further trials. As completed, Hood remained susceptible to plunging shells and bombs. The torpedo warhead armor was reinstated during the ship's 1929-31 refit. For protection against torpedoes, she was given a 7.5-foot, 2.3 meters, deep anti-torpedo bulge that ran the length of the ship between the fore and aft barbettes. It was divided into an empty outer compartment and an inner compartment filled with 5 rows of watertight, crushing tubes, intended to absorb and distribute the force of an explosion. The bulge was backed by a 1.5-inch thick torpedo bulkhead. Aircraft. Hood was initially fitted with flying-off platforms mounted on top of B and X turrets, from which fairy flycatchers could launch. During her 1929-31 refit, the platform was removed from X turret and a trainable folding catapult was installed on her quarterdeck, along with a crane to recover a seaplane. She embarked a Fairy IIIF from No. 444 flight of the Royal Air Force. During the 1932 West Indies cruise, the catapult proved to be difficult to operate in anything but a calm sea, as it was frequently awash in bad weather. The catapult and crane were removed in 1932, along with a flying-off platform on B turret. Battlecruiser, a fast battleship. Although the Royal Navy always designated Hood as a battlecruiser, some modern writers such as Anthony Preston have classified her as a fast battleship, since Hood appeared to have improvements over the fast Queen Elizabeth-class battleships. On paper, Hood retained the same armament and level of protection, while being significantly faster. Around 1918, American commanders, including Vice Admiral William Sims, commander of U.S. naval forces in Europe, and Admiral Henry T. Mayo, commander of the Atlantic Fleet, became extremely impressed by Hood, which they described as a fast battleship, and they advocated that the U.S. Navy develop a fast battleship of its own. However, the U.S. continued with their established design direction: the slower but well-protected South Dakota-class battleship and the fast and lightly armored Lexington-class battlecruiser, both of which were later cancelled in accordance with the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922. Influences from Hood showed on subsequent Lexington designs, with the reduction of the main armor belt, the change to sloped armor, and the addition of 4 above-water torpedo tubes to the 4 underwater tubes of the original design. To add to the confusion, Royal Navy documents of the period often describe any battleship with a maximum speed over 24 knots, 44 kilometers per hour, 28 miles per hour, as a battlecruiser, regardless of the amount of protective armor. For instance, the never-built G3 battlecruiser was classified as such, although it would have been more of a fast battleship than Hood. The scale of Hood's protection, though adequate for the Jutland era, was at best marginal against the new generation of 16-inch, 406 mm gunned capital ships that emerged soon after her completion in 1920, typified by the American Colorado-class and the Japanese Nagato-class battleships. The Royal Navy were fully aware that the ship's protection flaws still remained, even in her revised design. Sir Hood was intended for the duties of a battlecruiser, and she served in the battlecruiser squadrons through most of her career. Late in her career, Hood was outclassed by the armor and protective arrangement of World War II-era fast battleships, but few available big-gun vessels could match Bismarck's speed, and in 1941 the Admiralty included Hood among the ships sent to engage the German battleship. Construction of Hood began at the John Brown and Company shipyards in Clydebank, Scotland, on 1 September 1916, following the loss of 3 British battlecruisers at the Battle of Jutland. 5,000 tons of extra armor and bracing were added to Hood's design. Most seriously, the deck protection was flawed. Spread over 3 decks, it was designed to detonate an incoming shell on impact with the top deck, with much of the energy being absorbed as the exploding shell had to penetrate the armor of the next 2 decks. The development of effective time delay shells at the end of World War I made this scheme much less effective, as the intact shell would penetrate layers of weak armor and explode deep inside the ship. In addition, she was grossly overweight compared to her original design, making her a wet ship with a highly stressed structure. She was launched on the 22nd of August 1918 by the widow of Rear Admiral Sir Horace Hood, a great-great-grandson of Admiral Samuel Hood, for whom the ship was named. Sir Horace Hood had been killed while commanding the 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron and flying his flag in Invincible, one of the 3 battlecruisers which blew up at the Battle of Jutland. In order to make room in John Brown's shipyard for merchant construction, Hood sailed for Rosyth to complete her fitting out on 9 January 1920. After sea trials, she was commissioned on 15 May 1920. Under Captain Wilfred Tomkinson, she had cost £6,025,000 to build, roughly equivalent to £217 million today. With her conspicuous twin funnels and lean profile, Hood was widely regarded one of the finest-looking warships ever built. She was also the largest warship afloat when she was commissioned and retained that distinction for the next 20 years. Her size and powerful armament earned her the nickname of Mighty Hood, and she came to symbolize the might of the British Empire itself. Interwar Service. Shortly after commissioning on 15 May 1920, Hood became the flagship of the battlecruiser squadron of the Atlantic Fleet, under the command of Rear Admiral Sir Roger Keyes. After a cruise to Scandinavian waters that year, Captain Geoffrey Mackworth assumed command. Hood visited the Mediterranean in 1921 and 1922 to show the flag and to train with the Mediterranean Fleet, before sailing on a cruise to Brazil and the West Indies in company with the battlecruiser squadron. Captain John M. Thurn was in command when Hood, accompanied by the battlecruiser Repulse and Danae-class cruisers of the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron, set out on a world cruise from west to east via the Panama Canal in November 1923. The objective of the cruise was to remind the Dominions of their dependence on British sea power, and encourage them to support it with money, ships and facilities. They returned home 10 months later in September 1924, having visited South Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand, Canada and the United States, and some smaller colonies and dependencies en route. While in Australia in April 1924, the squadron escorted the battlecruiser HMS Australia out to sea, where she was scuttled in compliance with the Washington Naval Treaty. The battlecruiser squadron visited Lisbon in January 1925 to participate in the Vasco da Gama celebrations before continuing on to the Mediterranean for exercises. Hood continued this pattern of a winter training visit to the Mediterranean for the rest of the decade. Captain Harold Reinald relieved Captain M. Thurn on 30 April 1925 and was relieved in turn by Captain Wilfred French on 21 May 1927. Hood was given a major refit from 1 May 1929 to 10 March 1931, and afterwards resumed her role as flagship of the battlecruiser squadron under the command of Captain Julian Patterson. Later that year, her crew participated in the Invergordon mutiny over the pay cuts for the sailors. It ended peacefully and Hood returned to her home port afterwards. The battlecruiser squadron made a Caribbean cruise in early 1932, and Hood was given another brief refit between 31 March and 10 May at Portsmouth. Captain Thomas Binney assumed command on 15 August 1932, and the ship resumed her previous practice of a winter cruise in the Mediterranean the next year. Captain Thomas Tower replaced Captain Binney on 30 August 1933. Her secondary and anti-aircraft fire control directors were rearranged during another quick refit between 1 August and 5 September 1934. While en route to Gibraltar for a Mediterranean cruise, Hood was rammed in the portside quarterdeck by the battlecruiser Renown on 23 January 1935. The damage to Hood was limited to her left outer propeller and an 18-inch (460 mm) dent. Although some hull plates were knocked loose from the impact, temporary repairs were made at Gibraltar before the ship sailed to Portsmouth for permanent repairs between February and May 1935. The captains of both ships were court-martialed, as was the squadron commander. Rear Admiral Sidney Bailey, Tower and Bailey were acquitted, but Renown's Captain Sawbridge was relieved of command. The Admiralty dissented from the verdict, reinstated Sawbridge, and criticized Bailey for ambiguous signals during the maneuver. The ship participated in King George V's Silver Jubilee Fleet Review at Spithead the following August. She was attached to the Mediterranean Fleet shortly afterwards and stationed at Gibraltar at the outbreak of the Second Italo-Abyssinian War in October. Captain Arthur Pridham assumed command on 1 February 1936 and had returned to Portsmouth for a brief refit between 26 June and 10 October 1936. She formally transferred to the Mediterranean Fleet on 20 October, shortly after the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. On 23 April 1937, the ship escorted 3 British merchantmen into Bilbao harbour despite the presence of the nationalist cruiser Almirante Cervera that attempted to blockade the port. Hood was refitted at Malta in November and December 1937 and had her submerged torpedo tubes removed. Captain Pridham was relieved by Captain Harold Walker on 20 May 1938, and he in turn was relieved when the ship returned to Portsmouth in January 1939 for an overhaul that lasted until 12 August. Hood was due to be modernized in 1941 to bring her up to a standard similar to that of other modernized World War I-era capital ships. She would have received new, lighter turbines and boilers, a secondary armament of 8 twin 5.25-inch gun turrets and 6 octuple 2-pounder pom-poms. Her 5-inch upper armor strake would have been removed and her deck armor reinforced. A catapult would have been fitted across the deck and the remaining torpedo tubes removed. In addition, the conning tower would have been removed and her bridge rebuilt. The ship's near-constant active service, resulting from her status as the Royal Navy's most battle-worthy fast capital ship, meant that her material condition gradually deteriorated, and by the mid-1930s she was in need of a lengthy overhaul. The outbreak of World War II made it impossible to remove her from service, and as a consequence she never received the scheduled modernization afforded to other capital ships such as the battlecruiser Renown and several of the Queen Elizabeth-class battleships. The ship's condensers were in such bad condition by this time that much of the output from the freshwater evaporators was required to replenish the boiler feed water and could not be used by the crew to wash and bathe or even to heat the mess decks during cold weather as the steam pipes were too leaky. These problems also reduced her steam output so that she was unable to attain her designed speed. World War II. Captain Irving Glennie assumed command in May 1939 and Hood was assigned to the Home Fleet's Battlecruiser Squadron while still refitting. When war broke out later that year, she was employed principally in patrolling the vicinity of Iceland and the Faroe Islands to protect convoys and intercept German merchant raiders and blockade runners attempting to break out into the Atlantic. On 25 September 1939, the Home Fleet sortied into the central North Sea to cover the return of the damaged submarine Spearfish. The fleet was spotted by the Germans and attacked by aircraft from the KG-26 and KG-30 bomber wings. Hood was hit by a 250 kilograms, 550 pounds, bomb from a Junkers Ju-88 bomber that damaged her port torpedo bulge and her condensers. By early 1940, Hood's machinery was in dire shape and limited her best speed to 26.5 knots, 49.1 km per hour, 30.5 miles per hour. She was refitted between 4 April and 12 June. Operation Catapult. Hood and the aircraft carrier Ark Royal were ordered to Gibraltar to join Force H on 18 June where Hood became the flagship. Force H took part in the destruction of the French fleet at Mers el-Kayir in July 1940. Just 8 days after the French surrender, the British Admiralty issued an ultimatum that the French fleet at Oran intern its ships in a British and neutral port to ensure they would not fall into Axis hands. The terms were rejected and the Royal Navy opened fire on the French ships berthed there. The results of Hood's fire are not known exactly, but she damaged the French battleship Dunkirk, which was hit by 4 15-inch shells and was forced to beach herself. Hood was straddled during the engagement by Dunkirk. Shell splinters wounded 2 men. Dunkirk's sister ship, Strasbourg, managed to escape from the harbor. Hood and several light cruisers gave chase, but gave up after 2 hours. Hood had dodged a salvo of torpedoes from a French sloop and had stripped a turbine reaching 28 knots, 52 kilometers per hour, 32 miles per hour. Returned to home waters. Hood was relieved as flagship of Force H by Renown on 10 August. After returning to Scapa Flow on 13 September, after a short refit, she was sent to Rosyth along with the battleships Nelson and Rodney and other ships, to be in a better position to intercept a German invasion fleet. When the threat of an invasion diminished, the ship resumed her previous roles in convoy escort and patrolling against German commerce raiders. Twice, Hood was dispatched against enemy warships. On 28 October she sailed to intercept the pocket battleship Admiral-class, and again on 24 December to locate the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper. But Hood failed to find either ship. In January 1941, the ship began a refit that lasted until March. Even after the refit she was still in poor condition, but the threat from the German capital ships was such that she could not be taken into dock for a major overhaul until more of the King George V class battleships came into service. Captain Ralph Kerr assumed command during the refit, and Hood was ordered to sea in an attempt to intercept the German battleships Gneisenau and Scharnhorst upon the refit's completion in mid-March. Unsuccessful, she was ordered to patrol the Bay of Biscay against any breakout attempt by the German ships from Brest. Hood was ordered to the Norwegian Sea on 19 April when the Admiralty received a false report that the German battleship Bismarck had sailed from Germany. Afterwards, she patrolled the North Atlantic before putting into Scapa Flow on 6 May. Battle of the Denmark Strait. When Bismarck sailed for the Atlantic in May 1941, Hood, together with the newly commissioned battleship Prince of Wales, was sent out in pursuit along with several other groups of British capital ships to intercept the German ships before they could break into the Atlantic and attack Allied convoys. Hood was commanded by Captain Ralph Kerr and was flying the flag of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. The German ships were spotted by 2 British heavy cruisers, Norfolk and Suffolk, on 23 May, and Holland's ships intercepted Bismarck and her consort, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, in the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland on 24 May. The British squadron spotted the Germans at 05:37. Ships' clocks were set 4 hours ahead of local time. The engagement commenced shortly after dawn, but the Germans were already aware of their presence, Prinz Eugen's hydrophones having previously detected the sounds of high-speed propellers to their southeast. The British opened fire at 05:52 with Hood engaging Prinz Eugen, the lead ship in the German formation, and the Germans returned fire at 05:55, both ships concentrating on Hood. Prinz Eugen was probably the first ship to score when a shell hit Hood's boat deck between her funnels, and started a large fire among the ready-use ammunition for the anti-aircraft guns and rockets of the up-mounts. Just before 06:00, while Hood was turning 20 degrees to port to unmask her rear turrets, she was hit again on the boat deck by one or more shells from Bismarck's 5th salvo, fired from a range of approximately 16,650 meters, 18,210 yards. A shell from this salvo appears to have hit the spotting top. As the boat deck was showered with body parts and debris, a huge jet of flame burst out of Hood from the vicinity of the mainmast, followed by a devastating magazine explosion that destroyed the aft part of the ship. This explosion broke the back of Hood. and the last sight of the ship, which sank in only 3 minutes, was her bow, nearly vertical in the water. A note on a survivor's sketch in the British RN Historical Branch Archives gives 63 degrees 20 and 31 degrees 50 W as the position of the sinking. Hood sank with 18 men aboard. Only 3 survived: Ordinary Signalman Ted Briggs, able seaman Robert Tilburn, and midshipman William John Dundas. The 3 were rescued about 2 hours after the sinking by the destroyer Electra, which spotted substantial debris but no bodies. Aftermath of the sinking. Prince of Wales was forced to disengage by a combination of damage from German hits and mechanical failures in her guns and turrets after Hood was sunk. Despite these problems, she had hit Bismarck 3 times. One of these hits contaminated a good portion of the ship's fuel supply and subsequently caused her to steer for safety in occupied France, where she could be repaired. Bismarck was temporarily able to evade detection, but was later spotted and sunk by the British on the 27th of May. The official Admiralty communiqué on the loss, broadcast on the day of the sinking, reported that, during the action, HMS Hood received an unlucky hit in a magazine and blew up. The first formal board of inquiry into the loss, presided over by Vice Admiral Sir Geoffrey Blake, reported on the 2nd of June, less than a fortnight after the loss. It endorsed this opinion, stating that, c. the probable cause of the loss of HMS Hood was direct penetration of the protection by one or more 15-inch shells at a range of 16,500 yards, 15,100 meters, resulting in the explosion of one or more of the aft magazines. The conduct of the inquiry became subject to criticism, largely because no verbatim record of witnesses' testimony had been kept. Moreover, Sir Stanley V. Goodall, Director of Naval Construction, came forward with an alternative theory that the Hood had been destroyed by the explosion of her own torpedoes. As a result, a second board was convened under Rear Admiral Sir Harold Walker and reported in September 1941. This investigation was much more thorough than was the first, taking evidence from a total of 176 eyewitnesses to the disaster, and examined both Goodall's theory and others. See below. The board came to a conclusion almost identical to that of the first board, expressed as follows: that the sinking of Hood was due to a hit from Bismarck's 15-inch shell in or adjacent to Hood's 4-inch or 15-inch magazines, causing them all to explode and wreck the after part of the ship. The probability is that the 4-inch magazines exploded first. Both boards of inquiry exonerated Vice Admiral Holland from any blame regarding the loss of Hood. Memorials to those who died are spread widely around the UK, and some of the crew are commemorated in different locations. One casualty, George David Spinner, is remembered on the Portsmouth Naval Memorial, the Hood Chapel at the Church of St. John the Baptist, in Boulder, Hampshire, and also on the gravestone of his brother, who died while serving in the Royal Air Force in 1942, in the Hamilton Road Cemetery, Deal, Kent. Modern theories on the sinking. The exact cause of the loss of Hood remains a subject of debate. The principal theories include the following causes. A direct hit from a shell penetrated to a magazine aft. Such a shell could only have come from Bismarck, since Prince Eugen was no longer firing at Hood at the time of the explosion. As noted above, this version of events was almost taken for granted at the time of the sinking. Doubt first arose as a result of eyewitness testimony that the explosion that destroyed Hood originated near the mainmast, well forward of the aft magazines. For example, the sketch shown prepared for the second board of inquiry by Captain Leach of Prince of Wales At the second board, expert witnesses suggested that what was observed was the venting through the engine room ventilators of a violent, but not instantaneous, explosion, a deflagration in the 4-inch magazines. The same deflagration would have collapsed the bulkhead separating the 4-inch and 15-inch magazines, resulting very quickly in a catastrophic explosion similar to those previously witnessed at Jutland. This theory was ultimately adopted by the board. A shell, falling short and traveling underwater, struck below the armored belt and penetrated to a magazine. During the same action, Prince of Wales received a hit of this type from a 15-inch shell, which traveled underwater for about 80 feet. 25 meters, struck about 28 feet, 8 meters, below the waterline, penetrated several light bulkheads and fetched up, without exploding, against the torpedo bulkhead. The second board considered this theory improbable, arguing that the fuse, had it worked at all, would have detonated the shell before it reached the ship. According to Jorans's calculations, one of Bismarck's shells that fell approximately 20 feet, 6.1 meter, short of Hood could have penetrated the side of the ship beneath the armor belt and would have detonated in the vicinity of the ship's magazines if the fuse worked. The ship was destroyed by the explosion of her own torpedoes. According to Goodall's theory, the ship's torpedoes could have been detonated either by the fire raging on the boat deck or, more probably, by a direct hit from Bismarck. This would have blown out the side of the ship, destroying the girder strength of the hull. The force of water entering the hull, at a speed of nearly 30 knots, 56 kilometers per hour, would then shear the stern section from the rest of the hull. The fire on the boat deck penetrated to a magazine. Evidence given to the second board indicated that the doors for the 4-inch ammunition supply trunks were closed throughout the action. It remains possible that a door or trunk could have been opened up by an enemy shell, admitting flames to the magazine. Alternative routes for admission of flame could have been the ventilation or venting arrangements of the magazines or, as Ted Briggs suggested, through the floor of a 15-inch gun house. The explosion was initiated by 4-inch ammunition stored outside the magazines. Writing in 1979, the naval historian Anthony Preston claimed that the aft magazines of Hood were surrounded by additional 4-inch, 102 mm anti-aircraft shells outside the armored barbets. Such unprotected stowage could have been detonated either by the boat deck fire or by a shell from Bismarck. Quote, "The ship was blown up by her own guns." At the second board, eyewitnesses reported unusual types of discharge from the 15-inch guns of Hood, suggesting that a shell could have detonated within the gun, causing an explosion within the gun house. It is possible that, under the stress of combat, the safety measures introduced after the disasters at Jutland to prevent such an explosion reaching the magazines could have failed. An extensive review of these theories, accepting that of Preston, is given in Jorans's 1987 article. Its main conclusion is that the loss was almost certainly precipitated by the explosion of a 4-inch magazine, but that there are several ways this could have been initiated, although he rules out the boat deck fire or the detonation of her torpedoes as probable causes. In Jorans's opinion, the popular image of plunging shells penetrating Hood's deck armor is inaccurate, as by his estimation the angle of fall of Bismarck's 15-inch shells at the moment of the loss would not have exceeded about 14 degrees, an angle so unfavorable to penetration of horizontal armor that it is actually off the scale of contemporaneous German penetration charts. Moreover, computer-generated profiles of Hood show that a shell falling at this angle could not have reached an aft magazine without first passing through some part of the belt armor. On the other hand, the 12-inch belt could have been penetrated if Hood had progressed sufficiently far into her final turn. A more recent development is the discovery of Hood's wreck. Inspection of the wreck has confirmed that the aft magazines did indeed explode. The stern of the Hood was located, with the rudder still in place, and it was found that this was set to port at the time of the explosion. Furthermore, a section of the bow immediately forward of a turret is missing, which has led historian and former Dartmouth lecturer Eric J. Grove and expedition leader David Mearns to believe that, either just before or just after leaving the surface, the bow suffered massive internal damage from an internal explosion, possibly a partial detonation of the forward 15-inch magazines. It has been suggested that the fatal fire spread from the aft end of the ship through the starboard fuel tanks, since the starboard side of Hood appears to be missing most, if not all, of its torpedo bulge plating. The evidence of the wreck refutes Goodall's theory of a torpedo explosion, while the eyewitness evidence of venting from the 4-inch magazine prior to the main explosion conflicts with the theory that the Hood was blown up by her own guns. The other theories listed above remain valid possibilities. Wreck. In 2001, British broadcaster Channel 4 commissioned shipwreck hunter David Mearns and his company, Blue Water Recoveries, to locate the wreck of Hood, and if possible, produce underwater footage of both the battlecruiser and her attacker, Bismarck. This was to be used for a major event documentary to be aired on the 60th anniversary of the ship's battle. This was the first time anyone had attempted to locate Hood's resting place. Mearns had spent the previous 6 years privately researching the fate of Hood with the goal of finding the battlecruiser, and had acquired the support of the Royal Navy, the HMS Hood Association and other veterans groups, and the last living survivor, Ted Briggs. The search team and equipment had to be organized within 4 months to take advantage of a narrow window of calm conditions in the North Atlantic. Organization of the search was complicated by the presence on board of a documentary team and their film equipment, along with a television journalist who made live news reports via satellite during the search. The search team also planned to stream video from the remotely operated underwater vehicle, ROV, directly to Channel 4's website. After footage of Bismarck was collected, Mearns and the search team began scanning a 600 square nautical mile, 2,100 square kilometers, search box for Hood. Completely covering the area was estimated to take 6 days. Areas that Mearns felt were more likely to hold the wreck were prioritized, and the side scanner sonar located the battlecruiser in the 39th hour of the search. Hood's wreck lies on the seabed in pieces among 2 debris fields at a depth of about 2,800 meters, 9,200 feet. The eastern field includes the small piece of the stern that survived the magazine explosion, as well as the surviving section of the bow and some smaller remains such as the propellers. The 4-inch fire control director lies in the western debris field. The heavily armored conning tower is located by itself a distance from the main wreck. The Amidships Section, the biggest part of the wreck to survive the explosions, lies inverted south of the eastern debris field in a large impact crater. The starboard side of the Amidships Section is missing down to the inner wall of the fuel tanks, and the plates of the hull are curling outward. This has been interpreted as indicating the path of the explosion through the starboard fuel tanks. It is further supposed that the small debris fields are the fragments from the aft hull where the magazines and turrets were located, since that section of the hull was totally destroyed in the explosion. The fact that the bow section separated just forward of a turret is suggestive that a secondary explosion might have occurred in this area. Other researchers have claimed that the final salvo fired by Hood was not a salvo at all, but flame from the forward magazine explosion, which gave the illusion of Hood firing for the last time. This damage, ahead of the armored bulkhead, could have been implosion damage suffered while Hood sank. As the torpedo room that had been removed during one of her last refits approximates the site of the break, it was the opinion of Mearns and White, who investigated the wreck, that this was unlikely as the damage was far too limited in scale. Nor could it account for the outwardly splayed plates also observed in that area. Bill Durans points out that there was no magazine of any kind at the location of the break, and that the location of the break just forward of the forward transverse armored bulkhead suggests that the ship's structure failed there as a result of stresses inflicted when the bow was lifted into the vertical position by the sinking stern section. Furthermore, the current position of the plates at the edge of the break only reflects the last position, not the direction that they first moved. The forward section lies on its port side, with the amidships section keel up. The stern section rises from the seabed at an angle. This position shows the rudder locked into a 20 degrees port turn, confirming that orders had been given, just prior to the aft magazines detonating, to change the ship's heading and bring the aft turrets, X and Y, to bear on the German ships. In 2002, the site was officially designated a war grave by the British government. As such, it remains a protected place under the Protection of Military Remains Act of 1986. Expeditions to retrieve ship's bell. In 2012, the British government gave permission for Mearns to return to the site of Hood's final resting place to retrieve one of her two ship's bells, which were lying in a small open debris field some way from the wreck herself. With the backing of the HMS Hood Association, Mearns planned to return the bell to Portsmouth, where it would form part of the first official and permanent memorial to the sacrifice of her last crew at the newly refitted National Museum of the Royal Navy. The expedition also took the opportunity to refilm the wreck and survey her using techniques unavailable in 2001. As before, with the exception of the attempted retrieval of the ship's bell, a strict look but don't touch policy was adhered to. The original attempt, sponsored by Paul Allen and using his yacht Octopus, was abandoned after 10 days in September 2012 due to unfavorable weather conditions. In 2015, the same team attempted a second recovery operation, and the Hood's bell was finally retrieved on 7 August 2015. After conservation work, it was put on display in the museum in May 2016. The recovered bell was originally carried on the battleship Hood. The bell, before being installed on the battlecruiser, was inscribed around the base of the bell with the words, "This bell was preserved from HMS Hood battleship 1891 to 1914 by the late Rear Admiral, the Honourable Sir Horace Hood KCB, DSO, MVO, killed at Jutland on 31 May 1916. There is a second inscription, located on the side of the bell, reads, "In accordance with the wishes of Lady Hood, it was presented in memory of her husband to HMS Hood battlecruiser, the ship she launched the 22nd of August 1918. Quote, in addition to the two inscriptions, the bell still wears vivid royal blue paint work on its crown as well as its interior. Surviving relics. Some relics from the time of Hood's sinking still exist. A large fragment of the wooden transom from one of Hood's boats was washed up in Norway after her loss and is preserved in the National Maritime Museum in London. A metal container holding administrative papers was discovered washed ashore on the Norwegian island of Senja in April 1942. Almost a year after the Battle of the Denmark Strait, the container and its contents were subsequently lost, but its lid survived and was eventually presented to the Royal Navy shore establishment HMS Centurion in 1981. Other surviving relics are items that were removed from the ship prior to her sinking. 5.5-inch guns. Two of Hood's 5.5-inch guns were removed and replaced during a refit in 1935, and subsequently shipped to Ascension Island, where they were installed as a shore battery in 1941. Sited on a hill above the port and main settlement, Georgetown, where they remain. The guns were restored by the Royal Air Force in 1984. The Ascension Island guns saw action only once, on 9 December 1941, when they fired on the German U-boat U-124. As it approached Georgetown on the surface to shell the cable station or sink any ships at anchor. No hits were scored, but the submarine crash-dived. Fragments of propeller from a collision with HMS Renown. As a result of a collision off the coast of Spain on 23 January 1935, one of Hood's propellers struck the bow of Renown. While dry docked for repairs, Renown had fragments of this propeller removed from her bilge section. The pieces of the propeller were kept by dockyard workers. Hood v. Renown, Jan. 23, 1935 was stamped on one surviving example, and Hood v. Renown off arose of 23 January 35 on another of the known surviving pieces. One is privately held and another was given by the Hood family to the Hood Association in 2006. Recently a third piece has come to light in Glasgow, where the Hood was built. It is held by a private collector and stamped HMS Hood v. HMS Renown 23135. Notes. Bibliography. Brown, David K. 2003. The Grand Fleet. Warship Design and Development 1906–1922. Reprint of the 1999 ed. London. Caxton Editions. ISBN 1-84067-5314. Bastock, John. 1975. Australia's Ships of War. Cremorne. NSW. Angus and Robertson. ISBN 0-207-12927-4. Burt, R. A. 1993. British Battleships. 1919–1939. London. Arms and Armour Press. ISBN 1-85409-068-2. Campbell, John. 1985. Naval Weapons of World War II. Annapolis, M.D. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 0-87021-459-4. Chesno, Roger. 2002. Hood. Life and Death of a Battlecruiser. London. Castle Publishing. ISBN 0-304-35980-7. Friedman, Norman. 1978. Battleship Design and Development 1905–1945. London. Conway, Maritime Press. ISBN 0-85177-135-1. Johnston, Ian. Buxton, Ian. 2013. The Battleship Builders, Constructing and Arming British Capital Ships. Annapolis, Maryland. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 978-1-59114-027-6. Hone, Trent. 2011. High-Speed Thoroughbreds. The U.S. Navy's Lexington-class battlecruiser designs. In Jordan. John. Warship 2011. London. Conway. ISBN 9781844861330. Durans, Bill. 1987. The loss of HMS Hood. A re-examination. Warship International. Toledo. O. International Naval Research Organization. 24. 2. 122-180. ISSN 0043-0374. Durans. William. Gutsky. William H. Doolan. Robert O. Jr. Roberts. John. Fisk. Richard. 2002. A Marine Forensic Analysis of HMS Hood and DKM Bismarck. PDF. The Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers. Retrieved 3 July 2010. CS1 maint. Multiple names. Authors list. Link. Kennedy. Ludovich. 1974. Pursuit. The Chase and Sinking of the Bismarck. London. W. M. Collins and Sons. ISBN 0-304-35526-7. Mearns. David. 2009. The Search for the Sydney. Pymble. NSW. HarperCollins publishes. ISBN 978-0-7322-8889-1. OCLC 301,679,923. Mearns. David. White. Rob. 2001. Hood and Bismarck. The Deep-Sea Discovery of an Epic Battle. London. Channel 4. ISBN 0-7522-2035-7. Morrison. Samuel Loring. Palmer. Norman. 2003. The American Battleship. St. Paul. MN. MBI. ISBN 0-7603-0989-2. Parks. Oscar. 1990. British Battleships. Reprint of the 1957 ed. Annapolis. MD. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 1-55750-075-4. Preston. Anthony. 1979. Sea Power. A Modern Illustrated Military History. London. Phoebus Publishing Company. ISBN 0-89673-011-5. Preston. Anthony. 2002. The World's Worst Warships. London. Conway Maritime Press. ISBN 0-85177-754-6. Raven. Alan. Roberts. John. 1976. British Battleships of World War II. The Development and Technical History of the Royal Navy's Battleship and Battlecruisers from 1911 to 1946. Annapolis. MD. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 0-87021-817-4. Roberts. John. 1997. Battlecruisers. Annapolis. MD. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 1-55750-068-1. Roberts. John. 2001. The Battlecruiser Hood. Anatomy of the Ship. Revised ed. London. Conway. ISBN 0-85177-900-X. Stephen. Martin. 1988. Sea Battles in Close-Up. World War II. Annapolis. MD. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 0-87021-556-6. Taylor. Bruce. 2008. The Battlecruiser HMS Hood. An Illustrated Biography. 1916-1941. Annapolis, Maryland. Naval Institute Press. ISBN 978-1-86176-216-0. HMS Hood Association. HMS Hood Today, Wreck Overview, Description of the wreck state, and many annotated photographs, books and magazines. Official records pertaining to HMS Hood. Battle of the Denmark Strait documentation resource. Hunt for the Hood includes color photographs and a log of the expedition. HMS Hood 1920 Official Royal Navy page. Battle of Denmark Strait, a song tribute to the Hood. Obituary of Ted Briggs, last survivor. Imperial War Museum interview with survivor Robert Tilburn.